The courtroom in Washington buzzed with restless energy, every seat filled, every eye fixed on the front. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood tall at the defendant's table, her jaw tight, her dark eyes blazing with defiance. Across the room, Victor Grayson, a tycoon in a tailored suit, leaned back in his chair, a smug curl to his lips. The air crackled with hostility, thick enough to choke on. Chief Justice John Roberts, perched high on the bench, adjusted his glasses, his face a mask of stern authority. The trial was no ordinary case. Grayson had sued Crockett for defamation, claiming her public accusations about his role in a deadly factory explosion had ruined his name. The stakes were sky high, and the room felt like a powder keg ready to blow. "All rise," the bailiff barked, and the crowd obeyed, though whispers rippled through the spectators. Roberts swept into the room, his black robe billowing, and took his seat. "Be seated," he said, his voice low but sharp, cutting through the murmurs. He glanced at the papers before him, then fixed his gaze on Crockett. "Congresswoman, you are here to answer for your statements. This court demands civility. Do you understand?" Crockett's lips twitched, but she didn't flinch. "I understand plenty, Your Honor," she said, her tone sharp as a blade. "I'm here because Mr. Grayson can't handle the truth about his dirty hands." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Grayson's lawyer, a wiry man named Hargrove, shot to his feet. "Objection!" Hargrove snapped. "The defendant's insolence is irrelevant. She slandered my client, blaming him for an explosion he had no part in. Her words cost him contracts, respect, everything." Crockett spun toward Hargrove, her voice rising. "No part? Tell that to the families burying their loved ones. Your client's factory was a death trap, and he knew it." Her words echoed, raw and furious, and the spectators leaned forward, hanging on every syllable. Roberts slammed his gavel, the sound like a gunshot. "Enough!" he roared. "Congresswoman, you will address this court, not counsel. One more outburst, and you'll face consequences." His eyes bored into her, unyielding. Crockett crossed her arms, her chin lifting, but she held her tongue. For now. Hargrove cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, Ms. Crockett's reckless accusations have painted Mr. Grayson as a monster. She claimed he ignored safety warnings causing the deaths of 12 workers. These lies spread like wildfire, and my client's reputation lies in ashes. We seek damages and an apology." Grayson leaned forward, his voice oily and cold. "She's a loudmouth with—" "No proof," he said, smirking at Crockett. "You think you can drag my name through the mud? You're nothing but a cheap politician playing hero." Crockett's hands clenched into fists. "Cheap?" she shot back. "You're the one buying silence with your blood money. Those workers died because you cut corners to fatten your wallet." The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting in protest. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a headline. Robert's gavel crashed again, 3 times, each strike louder than the last. "Silence!" he bellowed, his face reddening. "Congresswoman, you are dangerously close to contempt. This is a courtroom, not a street fight. Control yourself, or I will control you." Crockett's eyes narrowed, but she gave a slow nod, her chest heaving. "Fine," she said, her voice low, venomous. "But I'm not here to play nice while that man lies." She pointed at Grayson, who chuckled darkly, unfazed. Roberts leaned forward, his voice like steel. "You've been warned. Proceed, Mr. Hargrove." As Hargrove began laying out Grayson's case, detailing lost deals and tarnished prestige, Crockett's gaze never left Grayson. The tycoon met her stare, his smirk widening, as if daring her to crack. The room pulsed with tension, every word a spark that could ignite the whole place. Roberts watched them both, his gavel ready, knowing this was only the beginning. The courtroom felt smaller now, the air heavy with unspoken fury. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the witness stand, her posture rigid, her eyes darting between Victor Grayson and Chief Justice John Roberts. The tycoon's smirk hadn't faded, and it gnawed at her like a splinter. Hargrove, Grayson's lawyer, paced before her, holding a stack of papers as if they were weapons. The spectators leaned in, sensing the fight brewing, their whispers a low hum beneath the creak of wooden benches. "Congresswoman," Hargrove began, his voice smooth but cutting, "you stated on national television that my client knowingly risked lives. Where's your evidence? Or were you just chasing headlines?" He tilted his head, mocking her. Crockett's fingers gripped the stand's edge. "Evidence?" she said, her voice sharp enough to slice. "How about the families? Crying at empty dinner tables? Your client's factory was a ticking bomb, and he ignored every warning to save a buck." Her words rang out fierce and unyielding, and a murmur of approval swept through the crowd. Grayson shot to his feet, his face twisting. "You lying fool," he spat. "I built that company from nothing. You think you can tear me down with your big mouth?" His voice dripped with scorn, and he jabbed a finger at her. "You're out of your league, Congresswoman!" The crowd gasped, some shouting in support, others in shock. Crockett stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "Out of my league? You're a coward hiding behind your money. Those workers trusted you, and you let them burn." Her voice cracked with rage, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Robert's gavel slammed down, the sound echoing like thunder. "Order!" he bellowed, his face a storm cloud. "Congresswoman, you were warned. Your disruptions disrespect this court." He pointed at her, his eyes cold. "You're fined $5,000 for contempt. Sit down and answer the questions." Crockett's chest heaved, but she didn't sit. "$5,000?" she said, her voice low, dangerous. "You think a fine scares me? This trial is a circus, and you're letting that snake run the show." She pointed at Grayson, who laughed, a harsh, grating sound that fueled her fire. "He's got you all fooled, but not me." The spectators erupted, some cheering her defiance, others muttering about her nerve. Reporters scribbled faster, their pencils scratching like insects. Hargrove raised a hand, smirking. "Your Honor, her behavior proves my point. She's unhinged, reckless. No wonder she slandered my client." Robert's face darkened. "Congresswoman, you will sit, or I'll have you removed." His voice was a blade, slicing through the chaos. Crockett hesitated, her fists clenched, then sank into her chair, her glare never leaving Grayson. The tycoon leaned back, whispering to Hargrove, his confidence unshaken. Hargrove resumed, his tone smug. "Let's try again. You have no proof, do you? Just stories to stir up trouble." He waved a hand, dismissing her. Crockett's lawyer, a quiet woman named Ellis, stood to object, but Crockett waved her off, rising again. "No proof?" she said, her voice steady but burning. "I've got more than you can handle, but you don't want the truth. You want me silenced." She turned to the crowd, her words carrying. "This man's greed killed people, and he's laughing about it." The spectators roared, some clapping, others shouting at Grayson. Robert's gavel crashed again, twice, 3 times. "Enough!" he roared, standing now, his robe billowing. "Congresswoman, you are testing my patience. One more word out of turn, and the fine doubles." His eyes locked on hers, unyielding, but Crockett's stare didn't waver. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper that somehow filled the room. "Double it, Your Honor," she said. "I'm not done yet." The crowd fell silent, stunned by her audacity. Grayson's smirk faltered just for a moment, and Robert's hand tightened on his gavel. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter, ready to snap. The courtroom was a furnace, every breath charged with rage. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat rigid in her chair, her eyes like daggers aimed at Victor Grayson. The tycoon's brief flicker of unease had vanished, replaced by a sneer that dared her to keep fighting. Chief Justice John Roberts loomed over the bench, his face carved from stone, his gavel still in hand like a weapon ready to strike. The spectators held their breath, the silence so thick it pressed against the walls. Crockett's last words, her bold challenge to double the fine, hung in the air, a spark waiting to ignite. Roberts leaned forward, his voice low but piercing. "Congresswoman, you seem to think this court is your stage. It is not. Your defiance ends now, or you'll regret it." His eyes narrowed, daring her to test him further. The crowd shifted, some whispering, others nodding in approval of his authority. Crockett rose slowly, her movements deliberate, her voice steady but laced with venom. "Regret?" she said. "The only thing I regret is sitting here while that man," she jabbed a finger at Grayson, "mocks the people he killed. You call this justice? You're protecting him, not the truth." Her words sliced through the room and the spectators gasped, a few clapping before catching themselves. Grayson slammed his hand on the table, his face red. "You're a disgrace," he roared. "You think you can bully me with your lies? I'll bury you in this courtroom." His voice shook with fury, and Hargrove, his lawyer, grabbed his arm, hissing for him to sit. But Grayson shook him off, pointing at Crockett. "You're nothing, you hear me? Nothing!" The crowd erupted, shouts and jeers bouncing off the walls. Crockett stepped toward Grayson, her eyes blazing. "Bury me," she shot back. "You buried 12 workers with your greed. You think your money makes you untouchable? I'll tear you down myself." Her voice was a whip, cracking through the chaos, and the spectators roared, some cheering her name, others yelling for order. Robert's gavel thundered again and again until the room quieted. His face was a mask of fury, his voice booming. "This court will not be a battlefield. Congresswoman, you've crossed every line. I fine you $200,000 for contempt, effective immediately." The crowd gasped, the number echoing like a gunshot. "One more disruption, and you'll be in cuffs. Do I make myself clear?" Crockett's chest heaved, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles paled. "Clear?" she said, her voice low, trembling with rage. "What's clear is you're letting this crook hide behind your robe. This fine, this trial, it's all a game to keep the truth buried." She turned to the crowd, her arms wide. "He wants me quiet, but I'm not scared. Are you with me?" The spectators roared, some standing, their voices a wave of support. Grayson laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Look at her, begging for applause," he mocked. "Pathetic. You're done, Congresswoman. Finished." He leaned back, his smirk, returning, as if the fine had already crushed her. Roberts stood, his presence towering. "Bailiff, prepare to escort the defendant out if she speaks again." The bailiff nodded, stepping closer, his hand on his belt. Crockett's lawyer, Ellis, whispered urgently, but Crockett ignored her, her gaze locked on Grayson. The tycoon's confidence was a taunt, and it burned in her chest like fire. She took a step forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think you've won," she said, her eyes never leaving Grayson. "But I'm just getting started." The crowd leaned in, sensing something big, something unstoppable. Robert's hand tightened on his gavel, his jaw set, but Crockett's stare held no fear. She was a storm-gathering strength, and the room felt it, every heart pounding, in anticipation of her next move. The courtroom pulsed with raw energy, every eye locked on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She stood defiant, her gaze burning into Victor Grayson, who sat with a smug grin, certain he'd won. The $200,000 fine hung over her like a storm cloud, but she showed no sign of breaking. Chief Justice John Roberts sat rigid, his face etched with frustration, his fingers twitching near his gavel. The spectators were a restless sea, their whispers rising and falling, caught in the drama unfolding. Crockett's last words, "I'm just getting started," echoed in the silence, a promise of something explosive. Her lawyer, Ellis, tugged at her sleeve, voice low. "Jasmine, Sit down. You're risking everything. But Crockett shook her off, stepping to the center of the floor, her presence commanding. She turned to the crowd, her voice steady, carrying a weight that silenced the room. "I'm not here to play games," she said. "I'm here for the truth, for the people, who can't speak anymore." Her eyes flicked to Grayson, narrowing. "And I'm here for my brother." The crowd gasped, a ripple of shock spreading. Grayson's smirk faltered, his brow creasing. Roberts leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Your brother? Explain yourself, Congresswoman, and it better be relevant." Crockett's chest rose with a deep breath, her voice trembling but fierce. "My brother Daniel worked in that factory. He was one of the 12 who died when it blew. He told me weeks before that Grayson ignored safety complaints. Workers begged for fixes, but he laughed, said it cost too much." Her words were a blade cutting through the room. "Daniel's gone because of him, and I'll be damned if I let him walk free." The spectators erupted, some shouting Grayson's name in anger, others crying out for justice. A woman in the back sobbed, her hands covering her face. Grayson shot to his feet, his face purple. "That's a lie," he bellowed. "You're making it up to save yourself. You've got nothing." His voice cracked, betraying a hint of panic. Crockett spun toward him, her eyes blazing. "Nothing? I've got proof you can't buy your way out of." She reached into her jacket, pulling out a small, worn notebook. The crowd leaned forward, breathless. Daniel kept records. Every ignored complaint, every cut corner. Every time. You told them to shut up and work. She held the notebook high, her voice rising. "You thought you could burn the truth with that factory, but I've got it right here." Robert's gavel cracked, but the sound was lost in the uproar. "Order!" he shouted, standing now, his voice straining. "Congresswoman, you will present that evidence properly, or I'll have it seized. Is that clear?" His eyes flicked to the notebook, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. Crockett nodded, her jaw tight, but she didn't back down. "Oh, I'll present it," she said, her voice low, dangerous. "And when I do, everyone will see what a monster he is." She pointed at Grayson, who sank into his chair, his hands trembling slightly. Hargrove whispered furiously, but Grayson waved him off, his eyes locked on the notebook. The spectators were on their feet, some cheering, others shouting questions. Reporters scribbled, their faces alight with the scoop of the year. Crockett turned to Roberts, her voice steady. "Your Honor, this isn't just about me. It's about every family that man destroyed. You want proof? Let me show it, and you'll see who's really in contempt here." Roberts' face softened for a moment, his eyes searching hers. The weight of her words, her loss, hung heavy in the air. He sat slowly, his voice quieter. "Proceed, Congresswoman, but this better be solid, or you're finished." The crowd held its breath, sensing the tide turning. Grayson's confidence was cracking, his smirk gone, replaced by a nervous twitch. Crockett stood taller, the notebook in her hand a weapon, ready to strike. The courtroom was a cauldron of anticipation, every soul riveted on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She held her brother's notebook like a shield, her eyes fierce, unyielding. Victor Grayson sat hunched, his earlier arrogance replaced by a nervous sheen of sweat. Chief Justice John Roberts leaned forward, his stern gaze softened by curiosity, his hands clasped tightly. The spectators were silent, their breaths held, as if the room itself waited for the truth to break free. Crockett's revelation about her brother had shifted the air, and now she stood ready to deliver the final blow. She stepped forward, her voice clear, ringing with purpose. "Your Honor, this notebook isn't just my brother's words. It's a record of Grayson's crimes." She opened it, revealing pages of neat handwriting and a folded sheet tucked inside. "Daniel logged every safety violation, every ignored plea. And this," she unfolded the sheet, holding it up, "is a memo from Grayson himself, ordering managers to skip repairs to save money. It's dated 1 week before the explosion. The crowd gasped, a wave of shock rolling through the benches. Grayson lurched forward, his voice hoarse. "That's fake!" he shouted, but his eyes betrayed panic. "She's forging evidence to ruin me!" His hands shook, and Hargrove, his lawyer, grabbed his arm, his face pale. Crockett's lips curled, not in a smile, but in defiance. "Fake? You wish. This memo's real, and so are the emails I've got backing it up. You thought you burned every trace, but my brother was smarter than you." She turned to Roberts, her voice steady. "Your Honor, I'll hand this over, but I want the truth heard. Grayson's greed killed my brother and 11 others. He doesn't get to walk away." Roberts raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "Hand me the evidence," he said, his tone measured but firm. Crockett crossed the floor, her steps deliberate, and placed the notebook and memo in his hands. The crowd watched, breathless, as Roberts scanned the pages, his brow furrowing. He paused at the memo, his eyes narrowing, then looked at Grayson, who shrank under the weight of that stare. The spectators began to murmur, their voices rising in anger. A man in the back shouted, "Justice for the workers!" Others joined, their cries swelling. Grayson stood, his face twisted. "This is a setup!" he roared, but his voice was drowned out. He turned to Hargrove, hissing, "Do something!" But Hargrove only shook his head, his confidence gone. Roberts banged his gavel, but the sound was softer now, almost reluctant. "Quiet," he said, and the room obeyed. He looked at Crockett, his voice low. "Congresswoman, this evidence is compelling. If verified, it changes everything." He paused, his eyes flicking to Grayson. "Mr. Grayson, you'll remain here. We're not done." Crockett's chest heaved, but her voice was calm, triumphant. "Thank you, Your Honor. All I wanted was the truth." She turned to the crowd, her eyes shining. "This is for Daniel, for every family who lost someone. We're not invisible anymore." The spectators erupted, clapping, some weeping, their voices a chorus of support. Roberts cleared his throat, his face softer now. "The fine is suspended, pending review of this evidence. Congresswoman, you've made your point." His words were a quiet admission, and the crowd cheered louder. Grayson stood, his face ashen, and stormed toward the exit, shoving past Hargrove. "This isn't over!" he shouted, but his voice was weak, broken. The bailiff blocked his path, and he froze, defeated. Crockett walked back to her table, her head high, her steps steady. The crowd rose, their applause thundering. She glanced at Ellis, who nodded, tears in her eyes. As Crockett left the courtroom, the cheers followed her, a wave of victory. She'd faced power and won, not with money or threats, but with truth. The families in the crowd reached out, their hands brushing her shoulders, their voices thanking her. Outside, the sun was bright, and she stood tall, free, the weight of her brother's loss lighter now, carried by justice.